For this next project, we're really looking at positive and negative space, but we have to start for this first practice in creating that positive space that we want to cut out from the laser material. So we're going to start by creating this snowflake. I'm going to start a new drawing, making sure it has my title block, it has all my line types, but I'm always going to start in my model space. I can fill my name out. I'm just going to call this Snowflake 1. You have 3 snowflakes that you get to pick from. You only have to draw one. The videos are labeled Snowflake 1, Snowflake 2, so whatever one you're drawing, you may be drawing Snowflake 2, that's the one you're going to put in there. So this way I have this, but we're always going to draw in our model space. So I'm going to come over into my model space, and I'm going to start with a rectangle, and I'm going to click, and I'm going to bring my rectangle up and to the right of that initial place I started it. I'm starting it anywhere on my visible space. So I'm going to make my rectangle 0.125. I'm going to press Tab, and I want it to be 3 inches tall. I'm zooming in just so I can see it better. So there's my rectangle. I want to actually remove this left side of my rectangle. So I'm going to trim, and I can cut that off. Now we're going to create a construction line, and most of our construction line will become an object line when we get to that point, but I'm going to click change to my construction layer, and then instead of selecting line, I'm going to type XL. It's an X line. It's a never-ending line, and we're going to set it at a specific angle. So I'm going to say A, enter, and the angle I'm going to set it at is at a 45-degree angle. So now I have this never-ending line at a 45-degree angle, and I need to place it. So I'm going to snap it to this top right corner of that rectangle. So this is what I should have so far. And then I'm going to offset this line. So I'm going to select offset, and I want to set my distance to 0.33, enter. And I'm going to offset this line 6 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that way now it looks like this. Now I don't want this left-hand side, so I'm going to use my trim tool, and I'm just going to trim that off so it's easier to look at. Now I've done a little bit. I don't want to have to redo any of that, so I'm going to come here and I'm going to press save. If you've never saved your drawing before, it's going to prompt you to select where you want to save it. So I'm going to choose my period, last name, my caps is on, Snowflake 1. So I know what period it is, whose it is, and what it is. And I'm going to press save. Now I'm going to show you in a minute, I'm going to offset this box, and I'm going to also offset that 0.33 so I can press enter, and I'm going to do that 3 times. 1, 2, and 3. Now if I go to save again, I just made changes, I'm going to press save. Because I've already told it what I want it to be called and where I want it to be saved, I don't have to set that again. So I just press save. So right now if I were to close out of this, it's going to open up exactly like this. So we're making half of one part of the snowflake. So we'll end up mirroring this when we're ready to, and then we're going to polar array to create that full snowflake. So I'm going to trim this whole outside part and these top 3 horizontal lines, because I'm going to start the first part of my snowflake right here So I'm going to trim this, I need to do my trim tool, trim this inside part. I'm going to trim those first two lines, and then this outside part we're going to actually trim off. So I'm just going to kind of keep following through. I need to make sure that comes all the way there. I'm going to trim this one all the way out. Again, I'm just kind of following inside, outside. I can always come back and trim those extra parts and pieces. And then for this one, it's just going to be this first point, and I'm going to trim all the rest of this away. So right now I have some extra lines. I'm going to delete those. Now, these are the parts of my lines that I'm going to leave as my object layer. So I'm just going to select this and change them to our object layer. In another video, we'll actually go through and I'll show you how we're going to create a new layer, because the line weight has to be very specific for our laser to see it. So here is the first half of our one part of our snowflake. So I'm going to select all of this and I'm going to mirror it. So I'm just going to bring this down. It asks me, do you want to erase the original one? I'm going to say no. That's usually what we want, so I'm going to say no, and that's going to leave the whole thing here. So now we have 1/6 of our snowflake. We have a little bit we want to modify before we polar array it, because then we're only doing 1/6 of the amount of fillets and modifications we have to do to this object. So I'm going to start by deleting this top line and then grabbing my fillet tool. So I'm going to set my radius, so R, enter, and I'm going to set that to 0.125. And a fillet is going to create that radius of that curve in between two lines. So I'm going to select this top line and this same one. We're going to use this same radius, 0.125, for all of our obtuse angles. So I can press enter. My radius is already set. I can see that down here. And I'm going to fillet all of my obtuse angles with that radius. I like to just go down one side and then the other. Again, I'm pressing enter in between each time that I click, so that way I can reactivate that tool. Now we want to also modify our acute angles, but with a different radius. So I'm going to grab my fillet tool, set my radius, and I'm going to choose 0.03, enter. So that is going to allow for a much smaller radius to modify that corner. Oh, I did see I missed some obtuse angles out here. I'm actually going to fillet my acute angles on the ends. I think it's a little bit nicer to have all these rounded. And fillet radius, set it back to my 0.125. I'm going to choose my obtuse angles. This makes it a little bit easier for the laser. I think it just makes my snowflake look nice and rounded. So there is my 1/6 of my snowflake. So I'm going to choose the whole object. Now, sometimes it'll default my array tool will default looking like this. I want to make sure I'm selecting polar array. If I wanted to use a rectangular array, I would use this to distribute my object in rows and columns. Think about the stars on the flag, how they're kind of separated like that. Whereas a path array is going to duplicate my object along a line, and polar array is going to duplicate it around a center point. So the center point is actually going to be the end point of those two short lines that are at the bottom of our snowflake. So we can see this right here. We want to make sure it's 6. If yours doesn't default to 6, you can come up here and make sure you change that. So I'm going to make sure this is 6, and then I can close array. Now, right now, this is going to act as one object. And we don't want to do that because it's not going to let us trim nicely or fillet this detail. So we're going to explode, E-X-P-L-O-D-E, explode, and then select our object. Now if I press enter, you can see now I'm looking at it as individual parts and pieces that we originally created. So I'm going to fillet. I'm going to set my radius to 0.03, and I'm just going to fillet in between these lines. And I'm going to press enter, and I'm just going to go around my snowflake, filleting those corners. Just like this. So this is the first snowflake that we would create. There's going to be a series of videos. The next one's going to show you the material that we would cut this out of. But in order to turn this in, I'm going to come over here. We actually drew it 2 times the size we want it. So I'm going to set my scale to half scale so that way I can really see this. I like to turn off my grid so that way it's easy to see. I'm going to change my DDE number, ratio, date, period, drawing number, and there is our first object for this kind of thinking about space in our design. So I'm going to make sure to attach this drawing to the Google Classroom. If you have any questions, be sure to let me know.